Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Mr. Mulatto, aka just Thomas. This is my second podcast I've done, or video cast, whatever people are calling it these days. And this one is also about books and reading. And I had the pleasure of reading two books along with a friend of mine that I got to know online. And he tends to be left of center, I tend to be right of center. And we decided that we would share books with different perspectives and then come together and talk about them. The book that he shared, and his name's Dominic, is a teacher up in New York. The book he shared was Nomad Century by Gaia. And essentially, this book takes the position that climate change is happening. We're going to get an increase in temperature, and that's going to have a lot of different effects for people across the world. And what are we going to do about it? Her answer to that, in a nutshell, is there's going to be a lot of places that are unlivable, and we'll have to allow for immigration. So get ready for immigration because here are all the reasons why immigration is great regardless of climate change. And we're going to have to make sure that we recognize that and allow it and plan it and manage it because climate change is happening and we're going to have places that are unlivable. And, fair enough, there's probably going to be climate change, whether it's in 10 years or 150 years, regardless of if it is or isn't man made and to what extent we can positively or negatively affect the climate. We are going to have the earth changing because it has over centuries and millennia. So if we survive long enough, it's something we're going to have to consider. And it's going to be hard to understand what we'll need to do at that time because technology could and likely will be very different, or maybe we'll be way back in the Stone Age because of some other cataclysmic event of our choosing or not. The other book that we read was Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. Now, he takes a different approach, and it's really not one book against the other. They're both talking about climate. But the difference with Alex's book is Alex is a philosopher by training, and then he became an energy expert later on. So he takes an approach to look at climate change, look at fossil fuel utilization and energy production in general, and then look at it from a philosophical perspective, not only his own philosophy, but what the philosophy is for climate activists, environmentalists, and what how that philosophy has been shaping policy. And it tends to be the approach that I like to take because I tend to want to get down to the very fundamental ideas underneath something. I want to know what the seed is so I can understand where the fruit comes from and why the fruit is shaped and tasted and colored that way. Because I'm a big believer in underlying fundamental ideas, making sure that those are what sprout our policies and ideas, and just understanding those dynamics. So it was a lot of fun to talk to Dominic about this. And you can see on the talk that we have different perspectives. And it was also interesting and fun to practice the conversation tactics. I did my best to really ask questions and pay attention and ask him to expound on his ideas. He pushes back a little bit, and so do I. But I wanted to make sure that we didn't do it too much because it wasn't really a debate. I want to approach it as understanding what other people think, asking them questions about it, and vice versa. So it doesn't turn into just arguments over petty little differences that we may or may not have. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'm going to continue to do this. I've got a couple more things lined up. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy it. Have a great day. The book that Dominic suggested to me was Nomad Century, How Climate Migration Will Reshape Our World. And before we get into it, Dominic, would you mind telling people about your job, what you do, who you are, where you are, and what it is about this book that made you decide to share it with your students?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. My name is Dominic Chaffordini. I'm a social studies teacher. I work at a private school called KO Academy of New York, which is in Westchester, New York. Most of my students are, in fact, all of my students are Japanese who are here to, one, to learn American culture, two, to work on their English skills, and almost all of them go back to Japan after they graduate and go to Keio University, which is a prestigious school in Japan. And before, one of the reasons I took this job is because before this, I lived in Asia. I lived in Hong Kong and worked for the International Herald Tribune newspaper, which is sadly gone now. I sold advertising, so I was not on the editorial side. But I became a huge fan of news and information and a huge fan of Asia. So this is a nice second step for me to be a social studies teacher here.
So what you said, a huge fan of Asia. So what was it about being over there that, I guess, captured your imagination and your passions and led you to this?
Well, good question. It in some ways it feels like the future in Asia. I know in America we think of ourselves as in a special way, and that's fine, and we should. But people in Asia, first of all, the population, not only is the population growing, but they're also growing in affluence and in influence, and they're growing in confidence. When I used to go to Beijing for work, people would stop me just so they could practice their English. You can almost feel the potential and the energy of the younger generation. And then I used to go to Tokyo a lot for work, and Tokyo is very different. They almost feel like a defeated culture. They've had a rough century, and then seeing China kind of surpass them is kind of another hit for them, because for centuries Japan used to beat up on China, and so now China feels kind of sowing their oats this century or this decade, and Japan has been struggling. So it was one of my favorite places to go because Tokyo was just so foreign. One of the things I like about Asia is silence. Silence is actually, things are happening in the silence. You know, as a Westerner, we want to fill it with something. But I find as a teacher of Japanese students, I'm more comfortably going slower, letting things absorb. There's less arguing and more absorbing, more reasoned responses. I think it's made me more reasonable, and it's made me. I still have opinions. Don't get me wrong, but I think I'm more measured in how I express them, and I become much more aware of other points of view based upon different experiences.
Yeah, my brother just got back from Japan. He's a huge Dodger fan. I grew up in Los Angeles, and he's still in Los Angeles. I'm in Northeast Pennsylvania, not too far from you now. And it was, as a huge Dodger fan, they had, I think it was an exhibition game or maybe the first game of the season, but they played in Japan just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, it was the first two games of the season, actually.
Yeah, so that was exciting for him. One of the things you mentioned about Tokyo as feeling almost defeatist, it reminds me of my wife who went there on semester at sea when she was I guess it was in her undergrad. And she said that people actually would come up and apologize to her for World War II. So it reminded me of that. And I can imagine, like, it's such a different idea. Like, we would never do that for somebody coming from a foreign country. You're from Vietnam? Oh, you're from Germany? Oh, it's not, we're kind of like, we're over it or something. But it seems like there was this tension there when she was traveling.
That's interesting. I mentioned that to my students. They can apologize to me when they fail a test.
Right.
But even another class I teach is U.S. history, and when they're taught about World War II, according to my students, they are seen as the victim. They talk about the atomic bomb as if it just kind of came out of nowhere. They have the peace memorial in Hiroshima. So it's just a different perspective. But so I don't think that I'm actually surprised to hear that, because I know a lot of the official policy is we're not talking about it. We're not apologizing for it. It took them forever to apologize to the comfort women in Korea. So that surprises me to hear that, because it's not a proud moment in their 3,000-year history.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize some of the tension between Korea and Japan and China. So it was interesting to hear you talk about that, and even the perspective of the kids, how they learn about World War II is interesting to me. I always wonder what goes on in Vietnam, in Germany. Like, how do they teach about those different conflicts compared to our imagination about it, or our narrative, or even what are good historians teach? It has to be a very different perspective.
Well, Germany, I have my aunt was a teacher in Germany for a long time, and she says they almost embrace it too much. There's the memorial, the Holocaust Memorial in the middle of Berlin. They're the first group to raise their hands when a far right political group gains power, like as they have now in East Germany.
Right. I see that a lot there. Yeah.
Yeah,
They
it's
seem
almost like
really sensitive to it.
very sensitive to it. They almost embrace it too much. It depends on the perspective. And I've been to Vietnam as well, um, my understanding from that is that we obsess about that more than they do because they were in conflict for a long time with the French, with each
Right.
other, with us. For us, it has a psychic damage because of it didn't go well for us. But for them, it was just part of a long conflict. So that's what I love about social studies. It's not right or wrong. It's all about perspective and point of view, which in my class I'm always stressing. Which I was very happy to read the book you suggested because that's not normally the point of view that we discuss in my class.
Yeah. So before we get to that, the book Nomad Century, can you tell us a little bit about it and why you chose it? And then I want to hear what your students' perspectives were on it.
Sure. Well, my 12th grade class is about globalization, and we start the class talking about the movements of people, how globalization has always existed. Now it's a lot faster because we're all connected like we are here, like you and I are here. It's easier to move from one place to another, but people have always moved. We've been nomadic people from the beginning of time. And so it's important to understand that globalization is not new. It's faster now. There's always been a backlash against globalization throughout different times. And then later in the course, we talk about climate change and all the things that we know about it. The Earth is warming, and more CO2 in the air, warming temperatures, and the fact that she embraces this, she kind of marries the two ideas that people have and always will move to places that are better suited for them. And what I like about the book is rather than talking about what we should do about it, climate change, she just accepts it as a fait accompli. It's going to happen. And so when it happens, people are going to move from where they are now to places where they can survive. And so for my students, it was interesting that to combine these two things we had talked about that seemingly are different things and realize that globalization and nomadic movements, migration is actually related to climate change. They're not two different things.
Yeah. So one of the things that, I did appreciate about the book is what you said, where she essentially said, it's going to happen and this is how we deal with it. And I think one of the things that might make it easier for somebody who may be somewhat skeptical of some of the claims, of whether they're mild or catastrophic, is that even if we don't personally get involved in changing the climate in one direction or the other, we know that it's going to change, whether it's warmer or colder, because it always has throughout the history of the Earth. So regardless of who causes the climate change or how it's caused, we know that there are going to be changes. So how do we deal with it? Whether it's adapting to it in place, or if it gets to an extreme point, having to move. So that was part of what I really enjoyed about it. Where I was like, okay, that's fair enough. Just like you said. Anything else specifically about that, or how do your students react to that?
Yeah, well, I want to push back just a little bit on that. She makes it very clear that it's man-made climate change that's the issue. Yes, climate has always changed over time. It's something we talk about in my course, but it's been slow, natural, 400, 500,000
Natural.
years. Right, 400, 500,000 years for temperatures to go up, temperatures to go down. What's happening now is rapid climate change, which is not natural, and it dates back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I can show you, and you've seen yourself, chart after chart of the natural and then the spike since we started burning fossil fuels. So she's not shy about that. There's no doubting in her mind that this is because of man-made activity. Do you agree
Yeah,
with that?
yeah. I agree with her take. Yeah. So I wasn't saying her take was, but even if somebody wasn't, because regardless of who causes it, um, we may have to make some changes. So even the manner in which the climate exist if it doesn't change. Every day we have to deal with it. So regardless of how it changes, if we accept that we are involved with it, which most of us, I think, believe we are involved to some extent or another, including myself. But regardless of the extent of why it changes, we know that it's going to change. And it's easy to look at that portion of what her message was and say, okay, let's say things change for whatever reason. We have to accept that there likely will be people who have to move. The Obamas on Martha's Vineyard may not be able to live there for the next several generations. Pacific Palisades.
That's your example of
that, you know?
oh, the Obamas. Well, now we have to do something about it.
Yeah.
That's your example.
Well, no, but I mean, people that are on the coast,
Yeah.
and they're when we live on the coast, or for this country at least, for the most part, yeah, of course, we're going to have much higher and properties like the Pacific Palisades as well. All the people on the coast, if we do have some kind of climate change that does increase the sea level and it starts more erosion, that's where we would likely see it the most, right?
Right. But,
Yeah.
but as she says, we also have the means. I'm not too worried about the Obamas if they had to vacation somewhere else.
Right.
We have the means to move places. And what I like about the book is I feel it's hopeful in the sense that if we just reimagine who we are as a people, and one of the things she talks about is kind of eliminating borders, let people go where they need to go. If we all have to move to Siberia, for example, because that will be the most hospitable climate, then let people go where they go. Stop putting up artificial borders, especially in today's political climate where it's becoming anti-globalization. This is mine. Stay out of what's mine. That's yours. I think her point, which I like to convey to the students, is the future is what we make it. We don't have to be subject to boundaries in our minds and physical boundaries. And because my students are Japanese, they are very sensitive to climate change. They could lose half their country, or
right.
from rising sea. Then, you and I could move to Nebraska. Where can they move? A lot of their country will be underwater. And we also talk about Western consumption lifestyles. I mean, who's creating the most fossil fuels? It's our Western consumption lifestyle. My students have to fly back and forth to Japan 2 or 3 times a year. How much carbon does that burn? We measure our ecological footprints. And so I like the book because it's very easy just to harp on how bad everything is getting, as opposed to, okay, what will happen? And I think that, and what she writes, a lot of it is very flowery. It's okay if we eliminate borders in our mind and physically, we can deal with a warming planet in ways that I had not considered, because we usually talk about how do we stop the planet from warming, and she's kind of saying, well, we're not going to stop it. So what's next?
Yeah, and one of the things that I don't know that she dealt with to my satisfaction, I would say, is, I would love for people in different places to be able to move together to a new place. But some of my experience and some of the way I understand human development, I think that there's got to be a way that we manage it, because there are incredibly different ways of seeing the world and being in the world and setting up societies, that I can understand people when they have somebody new coming in who sees the world in a very different way. And I think it's fair for us to say we need to make sure we manage it. And she uses that word, managing immigration, very often. I'm not sure that I don't know if she takes it seriously enough, in the sense that people are so different that there's going to be a lot of strife to deal with, even if we get rid of those lines and allow people to move and mingle together. So I'll give you one example. And I think, like, if we're talking Americans, Japanese, people in the Americas, people in Europe, maybe even Eastern Europe, we already know there's differences, but but there's some places that are even more extremely different from each other, that it can be tough to be together. So in Afghanistan, where I deployed twice, we were in areas where there's nothing but farming, villages, tribal conflicts, along with Taliban, etc. And one of the things that we tried to do was help them get fresh water. So I was essentially what you would call a medic, a Navy corpsman with the Marine Corps infantry. So we did all that stuff, but we also did um, different projects to help get them fresh water by drilling down into the earth, creating pumps, and allowing them to have fresh water as opposed to going to the runoff from the Helmand River, getting buckets, and whatever the hell's in that bucket, it's not clean. They're using it to water, they're using it to wash, they're using it to drink. But one of the things that we kept finding was we couldn't figure out why nobody would allow us to go through with the drilling process. We were even hiring local Afghan engineers or whatever they're called to do the work. We weren't doing the work ourselves. So we're trying to develop using their own skills, their own abilities. And we would always have trouble getting it actually done. And a lot of it had to do with just conflicts on, well, yeah, I'd have access to that well and I would have water for me and my family, but so would they, and I don't like them. And even language things were so different. And my experience there, I really realized how incredibly different people saw the world, thought. And it makes me a little hesitant to say, cut down the borders, everybody can go wherever they want. We have to be able to manage that and also manage our expectations. And, one of the words that people use to describe this process is what do you call it when you force people to adapt to your culture?
Um, what's the term?
Accommodate?
Cultural appropriation.
No, the opposite of that. So if someone comes into our country, like assimilate. So we have to make sure people assimilate to something, and we have to say what that something is. Is it where if you go into somewhere new, you have to assimilate to whatever's there, or do we find some new thing that we have to assimilate to make sure people are coming together and have the same direction they're all pointing to? So I think there's a lot of those dynamics that I would worry about managing if it was a little bit too easy just to move.
Well, that gets back to American exceptionalism. People came here and started something new, right? I mean, my other course is U.S. history, and I always say that America is exceptional, but it doesn't mean better. It means exceptional that people came here to start something new. So we assimilated. Anyone can be an American, which is another thing that separates us from Japan. There are people that have lived in Japan for 20, 30 years, white people, gaijins, and they'll never be considered Japanese. Which as opposed to here, if you live in America and you get an American passport, you're American, which is a big strength of ours, as I'm sure you would agree. So if we talk about this climate world, being a country, a world of migration because of climate, we'd have to create something new. There's not much of a society in Siberia, for example. So, is Russia going to say, stay out because that's ours? We can be more than just people, different parts of land fighting with each other. So I don't doubt that's what happened in Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean we have to be a prisoner to it as we move forward.
Yeah. So when you say we come up with something new, I guess it's what is that something new and what has worked and what do we think because somebody's going to have to decide what that new is. Because if a bunch of people are coming together, so in America, we have what's our North Star, the principles in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, that kind of sets up the rules to make sure that that we're headed in the right direction. So if we all go together to somewhere new, we would need some kind of North Star. So somebody's going to have to decide what that North Star is. I guess
Yeah,
that's.
I'll volunteer for that if that's a job requirement. But this is also, if you would talk to people in the feudalism days, what would come after feudalism? Who knows? Something will come after capitalism. I'm not sure if this is related to what you're asking, but we don't know what that is. We live on a finite planet. That's another thing we talked about. We talk about sustainability issues. There's going to be 10 billion people in 30, 40 years. And not only that, but we're trying to raise 5 billion people or more out of abject poverty. Maybe not abject poverty, but trying to raise
Some level.
5 billion people to, there's not enough. We all can't live like an American. And there's been study after study of that. We all can't have a 2-car garage and drive 50 miles to work every day. We'll run out of oil. We all can't develop a taste for sushi. We'd run out of fish. So something will come after this consumption lifestyle that we have. What is it? We don't know yet. Just like the people in feudalism thought, what's wrong with feudalism? This is fine. It'll last forever, until it didn't. So that's why I thought the book was hopeful, because we don't know what the future will be like. Are we going to move to Siberia and build shopping malls? Probably not. In a world, let's say if she's right, and the world increases 3-4 degrees, and there are large parts of the world that are just uninhabitable. I mean, the North Star may be created for us, because what we thought was true is no longer true, and that's up to us. Are we going to fight each other in some zombie apocalypse?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, if that is the situation, I totally wish and hope that we can find some kind of North Star. But I do see that a lot of people coming together in a new place. I just had a flash in my mind. What was that movie, Lost, or TV show Lost?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. You're gonna have a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of different views coming together somewhere. And how do if we are going to manage it, I don't know that we can escape the idea that we have to articulate our North Star. Throughout history, we've always felt the North Star. And slowly, as we develop our language, we develop our writing, we read more and more, we expect more and more that we articulate that North Star to understand the feeling of that North Star. So I would imagine in the future that's not going to change, and we'd have to lay down some of those laws and come to some kind of agreement. But then again, depending on where those people go in different places, maybe all those different places have different North Stars in some sense, and we have essentially what we already have now, just in different places.
Maybe, but also, if she's right, worst case scenario, and half the world becomes unlivable because of 3 or 4 degree Celsius temperature rise, maybe the North Star will be, maybe we shouldn't buy so much crap. Maybe we should be valuing different things. You mentioned before, a lot of people don't read books. Maybe they'll say, I don't need the new TV. Maybe I'll go take a walk. Maybe I'll read a book. Who knows? It's certainly not saying capitalism is bad, but there are limits to it. And you can make an argument between capitalism and climate change, or rapid climate change issues. So back to why I like the book is because it kind of marries these things. Humans are humans. Yes, we've always been nomads. We've always sought the better life. And we came here and built something new. So I like the idea that it doesn't have to be catastrophic. It could be a rebirth of something else. We can be so much more than consumers.
Yeah, and she does talk. There was one thing. So I just came off reading a book called The Ancient City right before I read this book, and it does a lot of history of the ancient religions and where they came from and how they developed, really focusing on the development of Western civilization through Hebrew texts, the Greek thoughts, and how those things started to marry together and end up with Christianity. And one of the original things that really stuck with me, and I promise I'll link it to what we're talking about, but it was the idea that people take a piece of land, they bury their ancestors there, they start a fire there, and there's the hearth, and that's where they sacrifice, and their ancestors are buried there. And there's this cycle and attachment to the land where they live. And it becomes incredibly, incredibly deep. And when the father dies, the firstborn son then takes the rites of the sacrifice, and that includes the land as well, and how property rights started to form from that. So when we talk about, we are nomadic, and of course, there's a lot of people who have for very different reasons. I also see, we even see in some conflicts today, this natural human attachment to the land. And I think that there's probably that attachment. I also worry that um, there might be more emotion attached to that than she may realize or give credit to.
Possibly, but I guess it depends on how much time we're talking. Um, I'm trying to recall the timeline. Maybe you remember more than I do. This would happen in the next 100 years or so. We're not talking distant future, right? This happened pretty soon. But if you can't live somewhere, you can't live somewhere. You can't
Yeah.
food. You can't grow food. I mean, it's something we talk about with the anti globalization movement now, nationalism, which of course is different than patriotism. What I tell the students is patriotism is I love my country. Nationalism is my country is better than your country, and which is dangerous. The idea we're going to build a wall, for example, keep out people, that people are different than us, that doesn't work historically. It may win votes, it may sound nice to a certain period of people, but over time it doesn't work. People move, and people move because they have to move. And so climate change, if you look at the globe as a totality, as opposed to individual nation states, people are going to move. If you can't grow food below a certain latitude, those people are going to move, regardless of what we want them to do or can do.
Right.
They're going to, and so we can either resist that, or we can create something new.
Something stuck out to me that you just said. Difference between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is I love my country. Nationalism is my country is the best. And then tying that into what you said earlier, which was you can come here and be an American. You can live somewhere else for years. And I've heard the same thing about France. Thomas Chatterton Williams, he's an author. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he moved from the United States to France, and he wrote about a lot of racial issues in America from France. And he talks about how it doesn't matter how long he's been there, he's an American, and they don't see him as French. So what that reminds me of is America is an idea.
Yes.
And you can always come into and marry an idea. So if I say my country is the best, is that very different than saying these ideas are the best?
Well, I think more national is my country is better than your country. I need to destroy your country in order to feel good about my country. I think nationalism goes down a dangerous path. I'm an American. I think our system is the best. I've lived abroad before. No matter how screwed up we think we are, we're still the number one destination for immigrants. Oh, overwhelmingly, people don't want to move to China. People want to move to the United States. So I take a backseat to no one, and then our country is wonderful and fantastic. But I don't like the negative tinge. Our country is so wonderful, fantastic. Therefore, we need to keep out these people and put walls up. I'm just saying that there's something incompatible with that, and we're kind of getting off topic. But if it gets to the point where rapid climate change will make people move en masse, it doesn't matter if we don't want them to come; they're going to come, and we may have to move as well. We live in Pennsylvania. I live in New York.
White flight.
Have to move north to white flight. We may have to move north to Canada, despite the tariffs. So yeah. So what did you think? I mean, I appreciate you reading the book I suggested. Do you see why it would appeal to me with the different themes?
Yeah, and I exactly what you said, and I did appreciate that it was like, okay, this is this. I believe this is me and her voice. I believe this is going to happen. I don't think we're going to be able to stop this rise. So what can we do about it?
Yes.
If this happens here and there, we probably will need to move to different places. So fair. And I could imagine something happen, whether it's today in 10 years. I think I think this is going to happen in some sense. I just don't know how soon it's going to happen. It could be hundreds, it could be thousands of years. Hopefully, we're still around and doing great things. But the Earth is changing regardless, so we have to definitely think about how we will react to those changes and start preparing for those changes, whether it's here on Earth or being able to expand out into the universe somewhere, occupy Mars, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's a lot less likely. We talk about that too. The idea that we can go to Mars, that is a fantasy compared to we can do something right here. What I don't like is the denial that it's not happening, won't be that bad. That doesn't help. Hope is not a plan. And so that's why I like this book. This book is kind of a plan, and I don't want to have my 18-year-olds graduate and all I've talked about for the whole quarter is how bad things are. So that's why that book is I like that. It's up to us. We are empowered. Whether we move or however we create society, we're not stuck in this paradigm. What do you think of the idea that there's something following capitalism? Some people push back when I say that.
Well, when it depends on what people mean when they say capitalism, because when I say capitalism, it sounds almost like what I like to say instead is free markets. I believe in free markets, which means people should be able to make their own individual choices based on whatever incentives are in their own lives. When I hear capitalism, sometimes and I think I've heard actually somebody talk about the origination of the word, and it was actually utilized as a slur against the free market system, and it just kind of stuck. So when people say, well, we got to get rid of capitalism, or that can cause a problem, what I hear is you shouldn't be able to make all your own free choices. As far as when it comes to how it affects climate change, if we're getting richer and richer and richer and we can consume more and more and more, it takes energy to create, transport, produce, and replace all those things. I can see there's a logic there. But I don't know that taking away my individual freedom to make those choices would be the best way to go. Whenever we have some kind of compulsion that way, I always worry that a little bit of power turns into a lot of power. And I would rather invite people to do the right thing.
Yeah, of course, but there's always controls. There's always been controls. You don't always have freedom to do what you want. You stop at a red light, whether you want to or not. And if you don't stop, you get punished. You need some kind of guardrails in society. When I mean capitalism in this sense is consumption. We measure economic growth. We have to keep growing. People have to buy more stuff. There are limits to that, and I think that 10 billion people living like Americans is just not realistic, and that might not be fair. But there's just not going to be enough in the world, enough oil in the world, enough fish in the sea to everyone eat sushi every night and drive 50 miles to work. There just isn't going to be. So that kind of marries with rapid climate change. What will the next phase be? Which is a good segue to the book you had me read, because one of the reasons I like, if you don't mind, if we jump to that one.
Yeah, perfect timing. Yeah, so the other book we read is Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. So go ahead, start talking about that, and what was some of your thoughts were there?
Yeah, and obviously the two authors weren't writing against each other, and I mentioned to you, I like it that I think that they work together. He says some things that I think are clear to everybody. Burning fossil fuels has definitely created the civilization we have today, done amazing things, cheap, transferable, built our society. I don't think anyone really questions that. But as I mentioned to you in a previous conversation, we didn't stop using stones because we didn't end the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. Because the fossil fuels have done that, yes, but there are incredible negative side effects to the continued use of fossil fuels that I thought he glossed over. Like, oh, well, we'll figure it out, or there's nothing that fossil fuels can create that fossil fuels can't solve. He makes it sound like well, just because it's been great before, it'll always be great, and that was the issue I had with it. But before we get into that, the way I thought it worked well with the Nomad book is that The future is something that we can build, and fossil fuel continued use, which will be, whether we want it to or not, will continue on, especially as we try to lift developing nations out of poverty. That will continue. So there's a way we can meld the two. We can continue raising people's standard of living and burning fossil fuels, and we can still prepare for the world that she's talking about. The two things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and what I really appreciated about that, the Fossil Future book, was it really gets down to the fundamentals. And to give people an idea, Alex Epstein, who wrote the book, is a philosopher by training. And then he went off and started studying energy policy. He still writes a lot about it. I think that was his second or third book on energy policy. So the way the book is framed is it gets down to the fundamental nature of what people want to utilize fossil fuels for, and what the ideas at the bottom of the people who are maybe against fossil fuels or environmentalists are. It's really looking at, and I thought about framing it like this. It's a difference between I want to save, when you say you want to save the planet, do you want to save it from humans or save it for humans? And it felt like those were the two poles that he was identifying, to where if you save it from humans, a lot of the policies and the ideas are looking at, we want to minimize the impact on Earth because human beings impacting the natural state of the Earth is bad. The other one was, we want to make sure we have a planet that we can utilize in a manner that helps human beings flourish, whatever flourishing means, to the best of their ability. So that's what I really liked about it, because it got down to those fundamental levels. And I always believe that at the bottom of every idea is an idea, an idea, an idea, an idea. And those seeds at the bottom are what really manifest the fruit of some of the discussions we have, a lot of the arguments people have. They don't realize that there's something at the bottom that's feeding all of those things. So that's what I really liked about the book. He was very careful in saying, here's why I think this, here's the evidence, here's what they say, and here's how their actions match up to all these things on both sides.
Right. But I'll push back a little. I didn't like, I thought that was a bit of a false choice. It's not either choosing humans or choosing the Earth. And he makes it sound like it's, if you, what do they call it? The knowledge system, is anti-human. He said that he insinuated that a lot. We either make a decision that's good for us or good for the Earth. And we can make a decision that's good for both. Maybe
I think he says both.
Both. Right. And an example is we talked about this in my U.S. history class when we created the national park system, for example. This is during the Gilded Age when a lot of people thought laissez-faire, let business do what business does. And someone like Theodore Roosevelt had foresight. Wait a minute, we need to draw a fence around some of this nature or business will just take it over. This wasn't an anti-human or anti-business decision. It was a pro-human decision. We can have both. And as a big fan of the national parks, I'm glad that he did that. So when it comes to fossil fuels, no one is saying, or at least I'm not saying, that we should stop burning fossil fuels at all costs. And if that means people in Chad can't live a good life, well, then they just have to suffer. I don't know anyone and he says these kind of things a lot in that book. That's not anyone's position that I recognize. We want economic justice and we want a developing world country to develop. Of course we want that. That doesn't mean we have to keep burning fossil fuels for all time. He dismisses renewables, solar and wind, and he says, well, we've had 50 years and they haven't really done anything. That's not true. I mean, they're getting more they're getting more transferable, they're getting less expensive. When the car first came out, people who rode horses, didn't say, well, look, this car is terrible. My horse is great. It took time, but eventually people gave up horses and went to cars. Why can't we do the same thing with fossil fuels?
Yeah, and I think he lays out a lot of details behind why he says, I don't think there's anything in the book any point that he makes that he doesn't go back and give a whole lot of reasons why he says those things. So with the example with renewables, I think he gives a lot of many pages to why he thinks renewables will not, in their present state, be able to replace fossil fuels. And a lot of it has to do with the transportation and the heat that we have to create that fossil fuels use. So, for anyone who's not aware of this, we can use electricity for cars. We got plenty of electric cars. That's working pretty well. The lights in this room, the lights above your head, all the electricity that we have in our homes powers a lot and does a lot of good for us. But that's not all that we use energy for. There's things that we do with creating concrete with high heat, creating steel with high heat, the transportability. I guess that's the word. Is that a word? Transportability.
It is now.
Gases and oils that we use to power ships, things like that. We don't have any way to power an airplane with electricity. So I think he says something to the effect of, if we have a wonderful breakthrough and we get to that point, great. But there's nothing right now, there's nothing on the horizon close to being able to replace what we need for those high heats, for those transportation, things like that. So I think I would say he was fair in the sense that he doesn't say, oh, it can never happen. It's just that we have no evidence of that. And for us to be able to develop these other countries or allow them to develop, they need to go through the same process that we did, because we don't have any way to replace that. And he gives an example of a village in India where there was this huge project where they tried to make, they're going to start from scratch. They'll skip all the steps that they went through that we went through with coal and natural gas, whatever it is. And they powered the whole place with solar and wind renewable. And it just didn't work in the way that they expected. The grid would shut down. There would be days where there wasn't as much sunlight or less wind. And it just didn't work out the way that they expected. And the people in those village actually said, you know what? Can you just give us normal energy? We want to be able to do all the things that you do. So I think it was really fair in saying, yeah, that would be great, but we don't have that capability yet. And we need to allow these places to do exactly what we did and develop to a point where they start to care about the environment. Because it's easy for us to say we care about the environment because we're already here in a position where we can make those kind of choices because of our development and our wealth.
Yeah, but again, to me, that was kind of a straw man. Who's making that argument? Maybe this case in India, right? It didn't work, but in China, they're building eco cities. They're building renewable cities in Tianjin above Beijing, where I toured there 15 years ago, and I've kept up with it. They're building. It's easier to build a new city than to retrofit an old city. They're making car-free areas where you don't need a car. You can take an electric train to places. Community centers are close by. They're using renewable wind and solar energy. They're developing batteries to be able to store this energy. We're in the dial-up days of
maybe.
Yeah, but the way to get forward is to invest in these things. And look what happens. We have a reaction, maybe not from Alex Epstein, but we have a reaction from our politicians saying, well, it doesn't work. We're going to stop subsidizing, drill, baby, drill. And, that's also a false choice. We need to move forward with everything. Yes, with fossil fuels. That's what I like about the book. And thank you for the recommendation. Absolutely, we fossil fuels have created this wonderful life that we have, and that needs to be recognized. But we also don't need to be a prisoner of it. That's why, again, I think the two books can merge together. The future is coming in some form, and if we're still burning fossil fuels, right now we get 80% of our energy from fossil fuels. When I was a kid, I was 100%. So in 50 years, maybe it'll be 50% or 40%. And I thought from reading his book that he doesn't even want that. That it was like, well, fossil fuels are great. Let's just keep going. And did I misread that?
Well, I think it was, yeah, let's keep going because we don't have a real alternative right now. That's his view, that the alternative with what we call green energy or renewables just doesn't power enough to replace what we have with the fossil fuels. There are a lot of like the things you said where we have a lot of you can have a city that's on an electrical grid, but then the way to transport to create the concrete and then to transport things in that way, there's nothing that we have that's even able to come close to doing that. And it reminds me of the argument that he was making about the philosophy behind the environmentalists and what they're pushing is we probably have some ways to already do that. And if we really want to eliminate and reduce and eliminate CO2 and our carbon footprint, we've got nuclear. And if we wanted to do that, we could have been doing that. But those same people who wanted to really reduce their carbon footprint, if and when we have nuclear available, and then even to talk about nuclear fusion, they were always against that as well.
Right.
So that's why he says that there's an anti-human, anti-development bent to it, because even with the things that don't cause CO2, there's pushback against it. And now we're starting to see some pushback against some of the windmills as well for different environmental reasons.
Right. Yeah, I did. And again, with my Japanese students, they're very wary about nuclear energy after Fukushima accidents. So there is that element. There's an anti-nuclear. I agreed with him on that. We need to be promoting everything. I guess I just didn't like the cynicism that it's anti-human. That just sounds so harsh. And certainly, I would not promote anti-human policy.
Yeah. So for the listeners, I remember there's a part where this is kind of why he says that. So Bill McKibben, he's the author of The End of Nature. He was part of the Obama administration too. So he's been a leading environmentalist for a long time. And he writes that in The End of Nature, our goal should be a humbler world, one where we have less impact on our environment, and human happiness would be of secondary importance. So that's one part where you can see what his perspective and his posture towards the world is less impact, and he's not worried about human happiness. And then a review of the book by biologist David Graeber. McKibben is a biocentrist, and so am I. We are not interested in the utility of a particular species or free-flowing river or ecosystem to mankind. They have intrinsic value, more value to me than another human body or a billion of them. Human happiness and certainly human fecundity are not as important as a wild and healthy planet. There's numerous quotes like that where he says, this is what they're saying, this is what they're writing, and that's why I think they think like that. So I think there's some fairness to that. And when people tell me what they believe about the world or about human beings, I have to take them seriously until they prove me otherwise.
Sure. Yeah. And again, I agree with you. I agree with him. That's not the way to move forward. But then the tendency then is to react the other way and say, okay, well, fossil fuels are fine. I'm thinking about when studies come out that, people don't need to floss their teeth as much. And then say, okay, well, I'm not going to floss at all, right? There's a medium.
Yeah, we saw this with COVID, and I think that's why they had the messaging the way they did. Everyone to get the vaccine. Well, there's different levels of risk, and maybe no. They're not gonna take anything. Everyone get it, and I think that's why a lot of our messaging is like that, and that's why people stop trusting.
Yeah, I think that's true. But then we go the other way and say, well, maybe we should take fluoride out of our water, and maybe we shouldn't get vaccines at all. We should give people more credit for nuance. I mean, it's something that I try to do in my class. Yeah, well, good. I get an applause. It's okay to not know things. It's okay to learn things. Not okay. It's required to absorb new information, nuance, since you like that word, different degrees, in our polarized world of, yes or no, this or that, everything has two sides. We're almost forced to pick a side. And I have no problem with most of what he wrote in his book. And I think that needs to be said more, but that doesn't mean that we say, well, climate change isn't a problem and let's just carry on. I'm sure you agree with that as well.
Yeah, anytime the climate changes and it's going to affect our world, we need to pay attention, whether it's because we're below sea level or it's getting a little warmer, or, my gardening season is a little bit longer in Northeast Pennsylvania. You know, all these things matter. And I think both of the authors, like you said, have a lot of things that um, overlap and marry. Um, and, I really appreciated being able to uh, read something on a bit of a different perspective, and I hope you did too. And
Likewise.
yeah, because one of the things I really like about the Alex's book, and why I want people who may not be on as conservative in temperament as I am to read, is I want them to know that there's a lot of nuance in the other side as well. There's it's not just a bunch of rednecks sitting around drinking beer saying, "Oh, that stuff is just stupid. I'm gonna do what I want." It's like, no, that's not the case. There's a lot of people with really good ideas that do a lot of research and have different viewpoints for different reasons, and they're all founded on pretty good logical things. And there's probably some things in the middle of both of those perspectives. Um, like you said, there's nuance to both sides. It's not just nuance to one side or the other.
Right, exactly. And one thing I show them is a TED talk that Al Gore gives. So similar to his movie Inconvenient Truth, he has a line I like, that things happen slower than you thought they would, and then they happen faster than you thought they could. And he gives an example of mobile phones, and he has a picture of himself, carrying one of those brick phones, and how those caught on innumerably. Now there's more smartphones than people, right? Once
Really?
something like that. There's more smartphones, right? Because some people have two. I don't know. There's a lot of smartphones, but I don't want to be quoted on that. There's a lot
Right.
of smartphones. But when they first came to the market, they weren't reliable, and they would never replace a landline. But there were people like Alex Epstein. They'll never be as good as this. Well, never didn't last very long. Within a few years, that market took off. And a lot of the oil industry is subsidized, and resisting any kind of change. It's certainly not profitable for people to, when Obama, and I forget the name of the company, he invested in this solar energy company that went belly up, and I forget the name of it, but that was a big, oh my God, what a mistake. Okay, so what? That doesn't mean that the whole industry, again, nuance. So if we can find a way, we don't have the way to transfer with the batteries and with the storage life, and but there's more sun hitting the Sahara Desert every hour. Then if we can find a way to transport it, can we do that now? No, but can we do it in 50 years? Maybe. And isn't it worth exploring that?
Yeah, and I remember you speaking of the Sahara Desert. Alex in his book talks about the project where they were looking at utilizing it, and then they would have to have the power lines. And for my take on his perspectives was more, yeah, if it works out, great, but we haven't seen it being able to work out. So I don't want people that are in the Sahara or the Congo not have incubators for their babies. So because we have a moral stance on the manner in which energy should be produced. That's how I see it. I was like, yeah, I mean, I hope all these things work out great. They're not right now. Let's make sure those people can develop and live and be happy and fruitful. And then maybe some of those people that when they're developing, you've got some geniuses in there who are going to figure it out. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I think of it as the most precious natural resource on the planet is humanity. So if we develop more and more of humanity, we have more and more chances for that to develop that potential wherever it happens to be, in coming up with these solutions.
Wherever it happens to be, then it can move across borders. See how they come together?
Yeah, exactly. So they can connect. Well, good. Well, we were right at about an hour, and I've got kids getting off the bus in a few minutes.
Sure. This is a pleasure, and I keep the books coming. And part of being a lifetime learner is learning and always educating ourselves. I'm always happy to read other points of view, and I'm glad you are as well.
Yeah, and also just talking them out. Like I get a lot of benefit, I think, because I spend so much time reading and writing, but nobody likes to talk about these things. You get to talk about it as a teacher, but I'm like stuck around like, if anyone mentions anything, I'm like, oh,
Right, right.
but like no one wants to talk about this stuff.
Right.
So again, thanks for doing this. And you know what? If you have another book, let me know, and I'll see if there's one that matches from different perspective. Maybe we can do this again.
Let's do it. I'd love to. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good afternoon.
A real pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.